Welcome back to the water cooler, everybody. All right, when you think of Donald Trump, at least in Democrat and liberal circles, you think orange man bad. It's like he can do no right. Everything's wrong. He's responsible for, global warming. He's responsible. He's got blood on his hands in COVID, all of this. But our next guest has a bit of a different perspective because, he actually did some research and knows a little bit about Donald Trump. Joining us now, Doug Wead, the New York Times bestselling author and former advisor to two American presidents. Doug, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Congratulations on your new show.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks, Doug. And we're going to get to your book in a moment, but I want to first ask you about the election and what's your take so far, what you've seen. And, Trump is going to have to apparently pull an inside straight again or another miracle. At least that's the way it's coming across. What do you think might happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It would take a miracle, I think, at this point, which is possible. It happened last time, but I'm pessimistic. I see the United States right where Argentina was a few years ago. They had a booming economy. Their middle class was rich. They felt tender towards those left behind. They tilted to the left, voted in a lot of socialist policies, and the country's gone bankrupt. The billionaires, they always make it. They got their money out of Argentina. It's a sad story. I could see that happening to the United States.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, your pessimism. So you're talking about pessimism as it relates to you're talking about pessimism as it relates to America's future, potentially? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I mean, 30-second nightmare for me is Democrats win, control the executive branch and the Senate and the House. They changed the Supreme Court for the first time in 150 years and add 5 more jurists and make that tilt to the left. They bring in Guam, Puerto Rico as states to get 4 more senators. And then they do what they promised. They give free health care and free education and legalize citizenship to all of the illegal aliens, and the Democrats would rule the country for 100 years. I think that's very possible.
Yeah, and there is Trump's trying to stand guard against all of that, for sure. Hey, Doug, let me ask you about your book. I mean, obviously, you wrote about Donald Trump. It's called Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. Tell us a little bit about the book and what people need to understand about Donald Trump.
Well, it's a fascinating story that isn't told because the media doesn't tell it. And I interviewed him and all of the family members, and it's the opposite of what I thought. I found the White House and the president to be much more calculated than I suspected. Sun Tzu is supposed to have said, out of chaos comes opportunity. And I saw that with Trump. He blows up NATO, then he rebuilds it bigger, better than ever. Blows up NAFTA, rebuilds it bigger, better than ever. He reads a lot. That surprised me. And he's much more empathetic than I expected him to be. For example, the night of the election, he was glued to the TV, and Ivanka was saying, "You got to go, Dad, you got to go." They wanted to bring him to the Hilton, and he was transfixed by these weeping Clinton supporters on TV, these young ladies. He said, "Imagine how they feel. Imagine how they feel." This was Donald Trump, a side of him that I didn't know about.
Well, that is an interesting story. You're definitely not going to hear that from the media for sure. Hey, Doug, let me ask you a little bit about, as a historian, as someone who has seen other presidents up close and personal, what's your sense of how, and I know it's early, but how history could remember Donald Trump? Once again, I understand this is the first chapter, and it depends a lot on what's to come. But what is your sense about what Donald Trump has done to the presidency?
I think he's going to have a startling legacy because of what he's accomplished and what he's exposed. It's like someone who's turned on the lights in a dark room. Now the lights are going to go out again, but we'll never forget what we saw when the lights were on. And some of those memories can't be erased. There are things we now know about big corporate monopolies that we didn't know before. NAFTA is a good example. He said to me, "NAFTA is 17,000 pages long. They say I'm against free trade, the North American Free Trade Association. Think of that. The Bible is 1,000 pages long. So is War and Peace. NAFTA is 17,000 pages. It doesn't take that many pages to write free trade. It was filled with corruption. And he turned that on his head, and it made a lot of enemies. And the enemies are the big corporations that own the national media. Half of their profits are coming from China. They're not very happy.
Yeah, Doug, one thing that's fascinated me, the media just doesn't get Trump. They think they get Trump, but they really don't get Trump. They have no idea. I mean, it's fascinating to me that he is a billionaire who can speak and relate to cab drivers, if you will. He kind of speaks like a cab driver. And, if Mitt Romney would have been able to do that, maybe he would have won back in 2012. But Trump is something the media just hasn't really been able to figure out.
David, I admire you a great deal, and I followed your career, but I disagree with that. Okay. I think most, at least at the executive level of the media, they understand him perfectly well, and he's the enemy, and they're trying to get rid of him because he's released the angels of small business, and that's what created the great economic growth. Mm-hmm. So you have a company like Boeing that now has 40 competitors for some of their corporate government bids. They never had that before. They were an absolute monopoly. It's an interesting quote from a Soviet dissident. He said, when the truth is replaced by silence, that silence is a lie. So the media has been unfair not only by reporting false stories, they've been unfair by not reporting stories that are important.
I guess what I was saying more about the media, though, is that they always are kind of dumbfounded that Trump can, employ that strategy of shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue, if you will, that strategy. And they just keep coming every single day. There's commentary like he gets away with this, he gets away with that. But I truly believe his narrative has been the big brash New Yorker who can say or do anything. And that's his narrative. And people voted for him anyhow. Doug?
Well, you're right about that. You're right about that. But I was surprised by how much calculation there is. My best interviews were with Jared and Ivanka, and Jared said the first day he was in office, he wanted to do everything. He wanted to bring the hostages home immediately. He wanted to end ISIS immediately. He wanted to create jobs, everything on the first day. So he's one of the hardest working presidents we've ever had. Mm-hmm. In that respect, the media, they do underestimate him. And I think the media underestimates the American people who are on to a lot of the things that are happening. Mm-hmm. And they understand it in a way the media doesn't expect them to understand it.
Doug Wead, always a pleasure.